tight time schedule, so please keep minding the time. Okay, I'm Chizu Omori, the grand old lady of... Yeah. Welcome to our conference. You guys have cut me some slack, I hope, yeah. Changing Perspectives on Japanese American Incarceration. Yeah, really. I want to thank the Takahashi Foundation for funding the conference. And Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages and Kimiko Mar, Executive Director, for putting the conference together. A lot of hard work. Thank you, thank you. And there were many friends and folks who helped out, so thanks to everybody. I hope that you find these 2 days worthy of your time and attention. Now, you may wonder why I felt that the incarceration is still important enough in our lives to gather all of us to discuss and think about it. After all, it has been 84 years or so since it happened, but I think that there's a lot of unfinished business concerning that episode in our lives, and so I wanted to continue our explorations and digging and studying. We asked on our reg form what areas and issues were of special interest to the attendee. I was amazed and gratified that there were many, many answers to that question. Now I know that we can't possibly get to all of the issues raised, but we can make an effort, and we will have many issues for further discussion. Let me tell you a story. It is a true story, and one that I was involved in. It took place on April 20th, 1987. I happened to be one of the named plaintiffs in the class action suit, William Horry versus the United States. It was an accident that I was involved, but that accident changed my life. This was a lawsuit that should have taken place years earlier, and it was suing the government for all the violations of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights when the government put us in the camps. Well, better late than never. So on that day, our case was being heard by the Supreme Court. It is a solemn place. Proctors go up and down the aisles, making sure that all the rules are being followed. One gently tapped Gordon Hirabayashi on the shoulder, since Gordon, who was sitting next to me, had fallen asleep. So I was amused. Many important people were there in that courtroom. Fred Korematsu was also there. And I wonder what Fred and Gordon were thinking as they sat in the room where their cases were argued many years before. Solicitor General Charles Fried was speaking for the government, and he was presenting his case. And then suddenly, Justice Thurgood Marshall, the first Black Supreme Court justice, asked, "What is the difference between exclusion and killing?" Fried, flustered, stuttered, "Killing is much, much worse." Marshall, "How much?" Fried, "Well," Marshall, "when you pick up people and throw them out of their homes and where they live, what is anything different between that and murder?" Fried, "Well, murder suggests that life is taken contrary to law, taking. Well, is there any difference? What's the difference between that and taking the life?" asked Marshall. Fried, "Well, fortunately, large numbers." Marshall, "What is the difference between banishment and hanging?" Fried, "Well, large numbers of those who were banished were able after 1945 to return to their homes, and we should be grateful for that." Marshall, another. Fried, "Well, there was great devastation among their property." Justice Marshall, "That's quite correct, which is why Congress in 1948 passed the Japanese American Evacuation Claims Act, and why some 26,000 family claims were filed. It was an electrifying moment. I was thunderstruck. After that exchange, Aiko Yoshinaga Herzig, whom many of you know as the person who did the most to dig out information from the government archives and was the lead researcher for the Quorum Nobis team, the legal team, who worked to reverse the cases of Hirabayashi, Korematsu, and Yasui, and then for the congressional effort for redress, and also for this, the Hori case. Anyway, Aiko leaned over to Ellen Carson, one of our attorneys, and said, "He really gets it." And I might say I suddenly got it. It was an aha moment, and I started looking at our history in a different way. If Thurgood Marshall spoke that way about our exclusion, our incarceration, it jolted me. I am a survivor, a former inmate at Poston, Arizona, where I spent 3.5 years of my adolescence. My own experience was not so terrible, although my father's decision to repatriate to Japan was something that I fought. We did not go to Japan, so I came out of the camp feeling that I had dodged a bad outcome and promptly put camp behind me, not thinking about it until much later. Well, Hori versus the United States did not win. It was declared moot after redress was achieved in Congress. The rumors were that the price tag for the lawsuit was so much higher than the $20,000 given out that the redress bill, and so pushed Congress to pass it. Anyway, I was set on a course of learning about our camp history, and so I did. The more I learned, the more terrible I found it to be. My sister Emiko and I made a documentary about camp history called Rabbit in the Moon, and I did continue to write about the camps in various publications. I think of the many researchers and activists who have been long-time toilers in this field, and how so many of them are gone. Gary Okihiro, Jean Oishi, Martha Nakagawa, Lane Hirabayashi, Roger Daniels, to name a few, and others who are not well. I am so sorry that Art Hansen, who has been a mentor to many of us, could not be here because of illness. Art would have had so much to say, and he can't be here. So I just wanted to gather some of us together so we could talk and listen to one another, and we should be doing this while we are alive. As Emiko says, why do we have to go to memorial services to see friends? Why can't we get together now while we are alive? So here we are. Anyway, I hope this might be the first of many gatherings where we can continue to exchange stories and findings. Today, at this conference, we have scholars, community activists, survivors, and descendants to tell us their stories and about their work. Our Japanese American community was badly shocked and damaged by government action, and we're still dealing with it. And I think the fabric of our democracy was also damaged because of violations of the law and norms. There was a time when few Americans knew about what had happened to us, at least now. Most educated Americans at least know the term internment. Of course, we're trying to change that word to something other than internment, like incarceration. And given the political situation today, our story is in danger of being erased. I recently was sent an article headlined, "Signs to Police Negative History Went Up at Manzanar. Historians are nervous." Actually, I have the actual sign that was put up. And Manzanar National Historical Site belongs to the American people, and the National Park Service wants your feedback. So let us know, so forth and so forth. And any signs or other information that are negative about either past or living Americans, or that fail to emphasize the beauty, grandeur, and abundance of landscapes and other natural features. So it's beginning to happen that they're going to try to erase this history. So, well, they're trying to do that with Black history and probably all stories about race in America. So let us begin our conference. Hanako Wakatsuki, sorry, Chong. Yes, she will lead the next section.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Hanako Wakatsuki-Chong, and I am the Executive Director of the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. I have the distinct honor and privilege to introduce our first panelists of this conference, Jeff Burton and Mary Farrell. Jeff is a Cultural Resource Program Manager at Manzanar National Historic Site, and Mary is the Director of Trans-Sierran Archaeology Research. This power couple in the archaeological world will be speaking on the multiple sites and complexity of wartime incarceration to give us a grounding of the landscape of incarceration as we gather here and learn together this weekend. Our esteemed panelists were the authors of Confinement Ethnicity, which has found itself to be part of the Japanese American World War II incarceration historical canon. I know that I have quoted this book many times during my undergrad and graduate school career, and I still continue to learn from them and their research. Their groundbreaking archaeological study was published over 25 years ago, and they have continued to research associated sites on the continental US, Hawaii, and Alaska, and even in Canada and Australia. This presentation will cover many sites that they've researched, and without further ado, please welcome my dear friends, Jeff and Mary Farrell.
Hello. I want to thank Hanako for that very, very kind introduction. And I want to thank Chizu for inviting us. Can you hear me okay? And I want to thank all the preparations, the team, Kimiko, and the whole team that went into making this happen. Oh, I probably have to thank everybody, but I do want to thank everybody for being here because these are really difficult times, and I think it's important for our country to let them know what a really stupid idea the World War II incarceration was. It's everything. It's illegal, immoral, unjust, traumatic, uneconomical. But I think it's also important personally that we come together, people who think learning history or learning from history is a good idea, is something that we really need to do. And so Jeff and I really appreciate this chance to be here with you. And so what we're going to do is do an update of that confinement and ethnicity report that Hanako mentioned. And I have the clicker, and apparently there was supposed to be a break, so if anyone needs to get up, I won't be offended. This is the report that we wrote 25 years ago. The goal then was to combine archival research, field visits, and interviews with former incarcerees to provide preliminary documentation about what buildings, archaeological features, and artifacts remained at the sites where Japanese Americans were held in a blatant disregard of their constitutional rights. So it was an overview of places associated with the racism and wartime hysteria and lack of leadership that led to the incarceration of Japanese Americans. Tetsujin Kashima arranged for it to be republished by the University of Washington Press, and he wrote a really beautiful foreword for that new edition. This is the old map of the confinement and ethnicity sites. It included 10 so-called relocation centers, 15 assembly centers, 2 citizen isolation centers, 3 other war relocation authority facilities, over 15 Department of Justice and U.S. Army facilities, and 3 federal prisons. But like Chizu said, it's the more you know, the worse it is. Since that report was done, we have found out there's even more sites. So this is a outline of what I'm going to go through here. And we're also going to include some memorials that commemorate the episode and try to teach people about it. And if there's time, we can also list some Nikkei incarceration and internment camps in other countries. So not all these places had barbed wire, but every single site is a place where the U.S. Constitution was disregarded, where racism was sanctioned and perpetrated by the U.S. government, and where that history could be told today. One of the original report goals was to document the state of preservation and interpretation at each site. So we're going to include updates on that too. Now, please watch for subtle disclaimers. The sites in green in the following slides are places Jeff hasn't visited since the original confinement and ethnicity report. And the sites in red, he hasn't been to at all, but of course he would like to go as soon as he can. It's the big 10 WRA relocation centers that most people are familiar with, concentration camps that help families, each 8,000 to over 12,000 people. Three and part of a fourth are now operated by the National Park Service. Two are on Indian reservations and managed by sovereign tribes. Two are managed by private foundations, and two are located on private land. A lot has happened at Amachi in the past 25 years. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 2006, and the University of Denver has conducted field schools there since 2008. Two original structures were returned, and two have been reconstructed. The Amachi Preservation Society has operated the Amachi Museum in downtown Grenada since 2020. And last year, Congress designated the camp as Amachi National Historic Site. Gila River is located on the Gila River Indian Reservation in Arizona. Although public access is restricted, Koji Lau Osawa has done some creative research there in collaboration with the tribe. And there's now an interpretive kiosk and museum exhibit in Chandler, 20 miles away. Hart Mountain in Wyoming became a National Historic Landmark in 2007. And there's been a lot of preservation and interpretation work at the camp, including reconstruction of the honor roll in a guard tower, dedication of an interpretive trail in a victory garden, return of an original barracks, restoration of a root cellar, and the grand opening of the Minetta Simpson Institute in 2024. Guess I'm a little out of sequence here. A lot has happened at Rower since Confinement and Ethnicity was published, too. The cemetery restoration was completed in 2015. Kiosks and interpretive panels were installed in 2013. The World War II Japanese American Internment Museum is at the town of McGee, equidistant from both camps. Manzanar benefits not only from a relatively large staff compared to the other Park Service incarceration sites, at least before Doge, but also from a lot of dedicated volunteers in their community archaeology program. There's a historic mess hall, 2 reconstructed barracks, a reconstructed women's latrine, and a reconstructed basketball court, a reconstructed guard tower, landscape features at the Children's Village Orphanage, orchards in the baseball field. A mural honors the indigenous residents of the area. And the restoration of some of Manzanar's gardens is in progress. Minidoka was officially designated a National Historic Site in 2001. And since then, land has been added the honor roll reconstructed, a guard tower reconstructed, root cellar stabilized, baseball field reconstructed, barracks and mess hall buildings returned, an interpretive walking trail added, and in 2020, the grand opening of the visitor center. Poston is located on the Colorado River Indian Reservation in Arizona. Jeff did a more detailed inventory of what was left in 2006. A barracks was returned in 2012, and the burned remains of the Unit 1 Elementary School was designated a National Historic Landmark in 2012. Topaz was declared a National Historic Landmark in 2007, and the Topaz Museum in Delta opened in 2017. The Topaz Museum Board had acquired the central area of the concentration camp by 2020. Tule Lake Segregation Center became a National Historic Landmark in 2006 and was designated the Tule Lake National Monument in 2019. Katie Bishop conducted archaeological investigations on part of the site that's located on BLM land in 2017 through 2021. In 2023, the Tule Lake Visitor Center opened and the jail restoration was completed. But that's just the 10 sites. The majority of the 120,000 Japanese Americans people incarcerated during World War II spent some time in one of 17 assembly centers run by the Wartime Civilian Control Agency. In the past 25 years, memorials or exhibits have been added to mark 5 of the assembly center sites. And at Fresno and Tanforan, memorials or exhibits, the monuments we documented in confinement and ethnicity have been expanded. In 2015, the interpretation of Merced was expanded. In Portland, there is interpretation at a light rail stop where the Assembly Center building is still located. A new exhibit and sculpture were added to the Puyallup, Washington Assembly Center site in 2021 and 2024. There haven't been any physical changes at these assembly centers yet, but the building shown at upper right was used as part of the Stockton Assembly Center, and the photo lower right is of people who are working on a Tulare exhibit. The former Antelope Springs CCC camp was used as a recreation area for Topaz, 90 miles away. Cow Creek was used to house 65 incarcerees for Manzanar after the Manzanar uprising in December of 1942. As reported in Confinement and Ethnicity, Cow Creek is still Death Valley National Park headquarters, and 10 buildings remain from the 1940s. Of these 3 temporary facilities, the only one whose status has changed is the Tule Lake CCC camp, which is now part of Tule Lake National Monument. The site is closed to the public, but restoration is ongoing. There were 2 WRA isolation centers where the so-called troublemakers were sent. Moab, actually at Dalton Wells, is now part of a Utah State Park, and there is an exhibit in town at the Moab Museum. Loop was not only a citizen isolation center, it was also an Indian boarding school, and there are a lot of parallels about how groups have been segregated and punished to promote conformity and compliance. Check out the Archaeology Project Community Day in July. There were 9 Justice Department internment camps. Crystal City and Old Raton Ranch held families. Seagoville held women. The rest were all men. At Crystal City, Texas, the My Story Museum is working on an expansion of an exhibit titled America's Last World War II Concentration Camp, set to open in October of 2025. The Fort Lincoln Internment Camp in North Dakota is now part of the United Tribes Technical College and they are fundraising for a memorial. The Fort Missoula, Montana courtroom was where people arrested immediately after Pearl Harbor had hearings. The courtroom was restored in 2011, and there is a new exhibit in the historic barracks. When Confinement and Ethnicity was published, we knew that 58 Japanese so-called incorrigible agitators were held at the Fort Stanton segregation camp in New Mexico in 1945. But we didn't know the location until Tatsuden Kashima provided it. Just 2 weeks ago, the area was part of a wildfire, and 2 buildings that had been part of the German internment camp were burned. The Kuski internment camp in Idaho was a highway construction camp that held 256 Japanese aliens from 15 different states and 4 different countries. Stacy Camp conducted field schools at the site when she was at the University of Idaho. Old Raton Ranch, New Mexico, was the first family internment camp where 3 families from Clovis, New Mexico were held after they were besieged and threatened by their neighbors. The location of the internment camp at Santa Fe, New Mexico, is now a subdivision, but a monument has been installed overlooking the area. Most of the INS, Immigration Naturalization Service detention stations, were small and used for short-term incarceration, where people were held before being sent somewhere else. But they span the whole mainland, east to west, north to south. This map shows places where 1,212 Japanese aliens were arrested by the FBI within 48 hours of the attack on Pearl Harbor. One of the places those men were taken was Sharp Park, near South San Francisco. Another was Tuna Canyon in Los Angeles. A total of 2,000 immigrants from Japan, Germany, and Italy were held there. The Tuna Canyon Detention Station Coalition has created a traveling exhibit, and they are trying to get a permanent protection for the site, which is threatened by development. We know of 16 U.S. Army internment camps in the coterminous United States. Most were on existing military bases, and they held Issei who had been arrested by the FBI. Starting in May of 1943, the Issei were transferred back to Department of Justice camps to make room for prisoners of war. Camp Livingston, Louisiana, is within a national forest. The upper right photo is where Hawaiian Issei were held. The internment camp was part of a large military base, and there are still a lot of features and artifacts at the internment site. There are still historic features like building foundations where the internment camp was at Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, but new housing was built over part of the site between 2010 and 2016. The Army internment camp at Florence is now a mobile home park. The map on the right shows how extensive it was during World War II, and the economy of Florence is still very dependent on the prison industrial complex. It is home to several ICE detention facilities. Located on the Fort Bliss Army Base in Texas, the small detention facility here held almost 100 Issei for a little over a month in 1942. The Japanese gardens there weren't related to the incarceration, but rather were built recently by Japanese soldiers. The open area in the lower right is where the prison was. Fort McDowell was the name of the Army base on Angel Island, California. It held approximately 700 Issei. Most of whom were from Hawaii. After a week or two, the internees were transferred to Department of Justice camps. The site is now a National Historic Landmark and part of Angel Island State Park. Griffith Park, California, was a CCC camp before it was used as an Army internment camp. It now is a railroad museum and has a new interpretive panel about the camp. The Lordsburg internment camp in New Mexico was the largest of the Army-run camps holding Japanese Americans, and the only one built specifically to house people labeled enemy aliens. It operated for about a year. June 1942 to June 1943, and its peak population was about 1,500. It is infamous as the place where 2 Issei were shot and killed by the military police in July 1942 while they were walking to the camp from the train. There's a new museum exhibit in town. The site itself is on private land. 4 federal prisons also held Japanese American men who were convicted of refusing to report for induction into the Army, or in Gordon Hirabayashi's case, disobeying curfew orders that he considered unconstitutional. The Catalina Federal Honor Camp stopped being a prison in the 1970s, and the Forest Service campground there was dedicated to honor Gordon Hirabayashi and the resistors in 1999 and 2001. 8 local jails are known to have held draft resistors or troublemakers and others who protested the mass incarceration. The King County Courthouse in Seattle now has a plaque honoring Gordon Hirabayashi. Civil control stations, they were not incarceration sites, but rather where you went to register per the infamous posters put up in Japanese American neighborhoods. There were a lot of these. They included stores, temples, churches, American Legion halls, schools, chambers of commerce, government buildings, auditoriums, even a skating rink. A lot of them still exist. 30 are gone, but 46 are still present, and the fate of 50 is unknown. These are really powerful symbols of how the government's worst tentacles reached into communities, engulfing everyday buildings into this civilian control system built on racism. One control station in Oakland still exists. That's the photo in the lower left. Even though the houses where people's belongings are stacked are now gone. A control station in Japantown, San Francisco, is part of a walking tour that includes a monument and a few interpretive signs. The building on the left is a famous civil control station, now part of the Japanese American National Museum in Little Tokyo, LA. The Gopher Broke Monument, which describes how Japanese Americans served in the military, even as they were being deprived of their constitutional rights, is next door. Between 1942 and 1944, some 33,000 Japanese Americans got permission to leave the 10 concentration camps for short periods to work at Farm Security Administration farm labor camps. The Oregon Cultural Historic Heritage Commission has developed a traveling exhibit that features one of the labor camps in Oregon and 3 that were in Idaho. State Department hotels were where Japanese diplomats were held, but also included some American citizens who were the wives or children of Japanese diplomats. Then there are some other sites related to the incarceration, even if they don't have barbed wire and guard towers. The photo on the upper right is the Boy Scout Bridge at Yellowstone National Park, built by scouts from Hart Mountain. At lower left are interpretive signs near Keatley Farms, Utah, where some incarcerees worked. Other sites include national and local cemeteries where some incarcerees are buried. Now, Jeff isn't counting memorials as confinement sites themselves, but we've listed some here because they've taken on their own meaning and become important symbols on the landscape. The Bainbridge Island Japanese American Exclusion Memorial was dedicated in 2008 and is continually expanding. The Terminal Island Japanese Memorial was dedicated in 2002. The Venice Japanese American Memorial Monument was dedicated in 2017. The Panama Hotel in Seattle has a glass floor where you can see into the basement where some of the things Japanese Americans put there for safekeeping before they were taken away. When we were working on confinement and ethnicity, we thought there would be few confinement sites in Hawaii, Although some politicians wanted all 160,000 people with Japanese ancestry there sent to camps, proportionately few were incarcerated. But all the Japanese Americans of Hawaii were affected by martial law. Hundreds were picked up and interrogated, and over 1,000 were incarcerated, many of them sent to mainland camps. Working with the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii, we've documented 23 places associated with the incarceration of Japanese Americans in Hawaii. These places were located on 6 of the 7 inhabited islands and ranged from small local jails to government offices in downtown Honolulu to the large Honouliuli POW and internment camp, specifically built as a prison camp. Upper left is the immigration station where approximately 400 Japanese Americans were held while awaiting hearings, interrogations, or transfer to another internment camp. The little building lower left is the Lanai County Jail, where a Buddhist priest was held, possibly for 3 months or more, before he and his family were shipped to Rohr. Research by the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii, the University of Hawaii, and the National Park Service led to Honouliuli being designated a National Historic Site in 2015. That research included a lot of field work, to document that there was quite a lot left at the site under some dense vegetation and lots of flood deposits. In Alaska, Japanese Americans were temporarily held at these 4 sites. Most were sent to Minidoka, but we know 3 children were sent to Manzanar's orphanage. The military base is still here, but an archaeological investigation at Fort Richardson found no remaining features or artifacts of the internment camp. Places associated with the Military Intelligence Service Language School were not incarceration sites themselves, but certainly speak to the complexity of the Japanese American wartime experience. This former MIS school at the Presidio now has an exhibit about the MIS and the mass incarcerations. From San Francisco, the MIS moved to Camp Savage in Minnesota. The Army facility is gone, but there is a historic marker. Then the MIS moved to Fort Snelling. At the upper left is the barracks where they lived. That building isn't open to the public, but there are exhibits in a different building used as a museum. Beginning in June of 1942, there was a Navy Japanese language school at the University of Colorado Boulder. There were about 150 Japanese American teachers, many recruited from the concentration camps, and some 1,200 students, almost all of whom were white. Fort McCoy in Wisconsin is one of the places where the 100th Infantry Battalion trained before being deployed to Europe. And there's a lot outside of the U.S. too, but just in the interest of time, we don't need to go through those because we're kind of talking about the trouble with the U.S. at the moment. I do have a quote from Margaret Mead I wanted to say. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Now, you look at when you look at this, you think there's a lot. I mean, it's depressing what we're going through now, but when you look at how much has happened at these Japanese American incarceration sites in the last 25 years, it's quite a lot. And I think that is encouraging. And I especially thought that this morning after the guy that served me coffee said, he quoted Abe Lincoln, "Give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend 4 hours sharpening the axe." I think you've sharpened the axe. And so now ready to go chop down that tree.
So, thank you for all your work over the decades, that you both have been working on these programs. I kind of want to turn some attention to some of Jeff's work, because, I participated so just to let you all know, I'm Yonsei Gosei, and my family was incarcerated at Manzanar. And Jeff currently works at Manzanar as a cultural resource program manager. And he has this amazing program, which is a community archaeological program. And I would love to know if you could share how long you've been doing this program and why you decided to do these community activities, that engages the next generation in, trying to be stewards of these sites.
My first job with the National Park Service was working with volunteers.
Could you go a little closer to your face? Yeah.
So I knew the value of working with people that were really excited about the work. At Manzanar, I started working there in '93. We had some volunteers, and once people knew we were working there, more people wanted to volunteer, so it really wasn't a choice of not having a community archaeology project. But we started doing it every year starting maybe in 2007. And it was basically a way to, we would get some small amount of money from the National Park Service to do a project, and this is a way to do a much bigger project. Most of what you would see at Manzanar now, you wouldn't be able to see it without the volunteers' help and encouragement of doing that work.
Yeah, and I just recently went to the last Manzanar pilgrimage, and it was really great to see Merritt Park, all lush and green, and I know that there were issues with flooding and stuff where volunteers had to kind of work that site over and over again, but it was pretty incredible just to be able to go with my family, because my cousins, they didn't go back to Manzanar, or they hadn't been back for about 40 years, and they're trying to honor their mother who recently passed, and we were able to go see the site and then go walk to where my family's barracks were at the time. So it was really incredible. So I just want to thank you for all your work that you have done, because it helps me as a Yonsei and Gosei kind of heal in this process. So the next question I have before we open it up to the public is kind of for both of y'all. You've been researching these sites, for a while, and you're kind of compiling this national kind of overview of all these associated sites. Is there a vision that you may have not shared with anyone of what you want the information to be done with, whether it's additional research or if you want to see a development of these sites or preservation in other ways?
Well, I would think the final goal is to have some sort of interpretation at every site. You need to get the story out to as many people as possible. And these sites are spread all across the United States, so people can come across them. I mean, one thing good about having a national park unit as one of the sites, or several of the sites, is people go to the national parks even if they don't know what they are. I mean, they want to do their whole passport book, get all the stamps, and so these are people that go to these sites and learn this history. Probably every day, or at least once a week at Manzanar, we get people to come in and have no idea what Manzanar is, and are shocked, and a lot of them leave crying. This sort of thing would happen. So it's a way to get the story out there. And at Manzanar, we try to even trick people to come in. Restoring a Merritt Park is a Japanese garden. Come see the Japanese garden, learn about the incarceration. There's a lot of local people that would not take visitors to a concentration camp, but they would take them to see a Japanese garden, and you learn this history. And Merritt Park's a good example of what the volunteers can do, because we started the restoration in the final restoration work in 2023, and the flood came through and completely buried it. And the National Park Service has no funding to uncover this. Oh, you could put it in a project and maybe it'll get funded in 10 years. But instead, within 2 years, volunteers had completely uncovered it, and we're now advanced in the restoration of Merritt Park more than we were before the flood, thanks to volunteers.
Mary, did you want to respond?
I would just add that I was excited to see all the civilian control stations because that is a horrible name and it was applied to just regular places. So if every one of those regular places could have interpretation to show how this terrible thing happened in places you don't know. Someplace you go to ice skate. I mean, that seems to me it would show a little bit more the depth and the breadth of the injustice.
So if they're able to find a way to do like a passport program or hoodwink people, you could get people going there, some type of gotta catch 'em all kind of thing, right? No, I'm joking. Anyways, I'd like to open it, questions up to the audience. I saw a hand up here. If we could get a mic to this lady up here in the red, that'll be great.
Thank you so much for the presentation and learning all this new stuff since your last publication. But I have a question about the signs that are going up, specifically at Manzanar, seeking input into things you think denigrate the history of America and not focusing on the beautiful landscape and all that stuff. What do you suggest we should, since that is a way to give input to the US government, what do you think we should say when we send emails to them reporting on this bad stuff?
Well, working for the National Park Service, I'm probably not supposed to say.
I can say.
Well,
But our first review of the comments, there were 3 comments so far, and they're all positive about Manzanar. And the thing is, those comments will not go up any further. We could get 100 good comments, but the only one that's going to go up is the one bad comment that they will do something about.
Is that right? Have they asked that the negative ones go up?
more likely. So
That-
I
that
no
is
longer
the-
National Park Service, I could speak freely on this. So, yeah, I would like to say I'm a recovering federal employee. So the thing with this is, first, I do want to just state that I believe that all these signs went into all the national park units. The one thing that I would recommend is, like, I know that there's a lot of posts that are, specifically saying Manzanar, Minidoka had to put this up. I would recommend maybe not doing it that way, saying all parks had to put these up, but here are 2 that I want to focus on, because in one aspect, you don't want to unduly target sites for additional scrutiny. And then second, I would also not mention people's names, because right now I feel personally that it's like the Red Scare. Everyone is trying to root out the bad actors or whatever, or who's progressive or who's trying to write revisionist history. So, yeah, if you want to flood it with all positive comments, I think that that's also a thing to do. But I wouldn't necessarily say, Jeff Burton has done so much, because I feel like that may target him, and it's being mindful of that, because what's happening in today's society and within government is really scary. And you don't want to, out of good intentions, you don't want to accidentally put people in harm's way. So just be mindful of that as you're doing your advocacy work, whether it's capital A advocacy or small a advocacy. Just make sure that you're being mindful of unintended consequences, so you're not accidentally impacting people. I saw a second hand, I think it's Eric. I don't have my glasses on. So, and then afterwards we'll go up here, because I was trying to see who was raising their hands first.
Hi, I wanted first of all to express gratitude to both of you for the landmark work that you did. It's so exciting to see that the work continues, but I wanted you to know that when I was getting started doing this work, that book was sort of my Bible to understand the landscape, and so thank you. I also wanted to, one more expression of gratitude, and I guess this is more directed to Jeff, but also through Jeff, to all of our National Park Service employees right now. I can't imagine what it must be like to be working for the National Park Service at a time when its mission seems to be getting wrenched into a very different direction. So my question is, to the extent that you feel comfortable doing this, I'm wondering if you could say a word or two about, not about what's happening, but what it's like for you or for people working in the National Park Service to be living through this moment when things above you seem to be in a pretty radical shifting mode. If you feel comfortable addressing it, I would understand if you didn't.
Well, again, questions like that we're supposed to pass on to the administration to answer. But it's demoralizing for sure. We can't hire permanent staff. We can't fill any positions. I mean, a lot of people took the buyouts. There's a rift coming where a lot of people are going to be laid off, and there's no way to fill those positions behind them. We have been able to hire some seasonals, but even that's been difficult. So.
And I will just say this, just from personal experience. It is really I don't know, it's alarming to see what's happening, right? But this is one thing that it actually has been happening for a while. Especially, I want to say people of color within the Park Service has faced unusual amount of scrutiny. That is very similar because I was recently talking to a former colleague who's still in the Park Service, and she was lamenting about some of the pressures. And I was expressing that, because I was in the National Park Service for 10 years, and my work was questioned all the time. Like under the first Trump administration, I actually had to defend why we named our park film Minidoka an American concentration camp. And I had to fight of why I'm writing so-called revisionist history in our temporary exhibit. And so I'm a historian by trade, so I basically wrote a research paper and sent it back to them, and I never heard back from them. But this is an issue where it always existed. It was just more inside the agency and inside the House. Now it's a little bit more prevalent because it's coming down from the executive office. And as I was talking to some of my colleagues, we recognize that we think that it's more because it's affecting everyone. It's no longer just affecting the people of color within the service. It's affecting all people across all agencies now. So I think that's why there's more of an issue. But this hostile environment always existed prior. And that's actually one of the reasons why I left the National Park Service. But we have time for only one more question. And I want to give it up to this lady right up here, because I think she was the third one. So if we could get a mic to her, that'd be great.
Hi, thank you for all that information. I am a resident of Bainbridge Island, and I appreciate having the exclusion memorial up there. There's one other site that is critical to the Bainbridge Island history, and that is a building that still exists, a historic building where the Japanese and Japanese Americans were told to report by, I think, March 25th. And so that's when they found out, and they had 6 days to be able to go to the ferry to be taken away. So that building has a replica of the notice and the entrance, and the owners let us put in a photo of what it looked like in 1942. We have a picture of that, people registering there in that building, and then what it looks like today. It's a coffee shop, great coffee shop if you ever come there. But yeah, so it's fortunate that we have this photo, so I'm willing to share that with you, thinking that might be something that would be interesting to include, sure, because that's unique to Bainbridge Island. They weren't confined there, but reported there, and that's where the federal agents were there.
Please let Masako.
Oh, okay. So Masako's right back there. If you could give her the mic, and she'll be our last question.
Hi. I just wanted to let everybody know how much we celebrate, or we should be aware and join us, please, in celebrating Mary and Jeff for being the archaeologists who discovered the existence of James Wakasa's memorial stone as not having been destroyed, but the courageous ancestors at Topaz buried it instead of destroying it as they were told by the government, and it was discovered only because Jeff and Mary found it for us. So please, thank them for us. Thank you.